Aris Untalan Morales lived with his family on Farrell Way in Elk Grove, California. His father, Marvin Morales, had spent years working as a deputy for the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. On October 24, 2023, Deputy Marvin stopped a known drug user at a Shell gas station on Stockton Boulevard. Upon searching the man, he discovered a bundle of drugs, which the man claimed was crystal meth. For some reason, Marvin took the drugs back to the sheriff's office, went into the bathroom, and began smoking them, unaware that it was actually fentanyl. He immediately began overdosing and passed out. Eventually, a deputy entered the locked bathroom and found Marvin with his lips blue and his duty belt resting on the baby-changing station nearby. In order to save Marvin's life, the deputy ran to his car, grabbed his Narcan, and administered 4 doses. Marvin survived, but his reputation was tarnished. Deputies at the department no longer trusted him, and several even needed therapy after witnessing the ordeal. An investigator later determined that Marvin took the drugs because he was suffering severely from mental health issues that came about from his time as a deputy and from his time serving in the Middle East. He told medical staff that he often cried before starting his shifts and had become increasingly isolated from his family. Once the internal affairs investigation was over, Marvin was notified that he was set to be fired. So he decided to resign and submitted his resignation letter on February 2, 2024. A few days later, the sheriff's office issued a formal termination order. The investigation also revealed past troubling behavior. In August of 2023, he took home a meth pipe he had confiscated, but wrote in his report that he had disposed of it. A drug test also showed that Marvin was actually a chronic user, not just a one-time accidental victim. The 468-page internal affairs report basically detailed his misconduct, drug use on duty, the overdose itself, dishonesty in reports, and his removal from the agency. A few months later, in late 2025, Marvin would do the unthinkable. Shortly after 8 a.m. on December 2nd, Mar's mother called Elk Grove police after seeing and hearing Marvin threatening the children on the in-home cameras. Moments later, she watched as Marvin attacked Mar, leaving him unconscious on the floor. When police arrived at the house, they found Mar in critical condition with multiple stab wounds and Marvin gone. Mar was rushed to the hospital, where he sadly died from his injuries. His 6-year-old sister was also inside the home and witnessed the attack. Thankfully, she was not physically harmed, but was taken to the hospital for evaluation and later released to her mother. When police searched the home, they found a gun safe that had been emptied, which meant he was most likely armed. Eventually, police spotted his vehicle heading south on Interstate 5 near Pocket Road, and a chase ensued. Marvin eventually crashed his car shortly after running over a spike strip near the Highway 12 junction, south of Lodi in San Joaquin County. At that point, gunfire was exchanged, leaving Marvin critically wounded. Just like Mar, he was rushed to the hospital and later died from his injuries. Thankfully, none of the officers were injured. When everything was said and done, 2 lives were lost, and their family was left to pick up the pieces. Margaret Anselmo was born on April 18, 1951, in Spokane, Washington, where she spent the remainder of her life. After graduating from Marycliff High School, she enrolled at Spokane Community College to study finance. By the age of 45, Margaret was a devoted mother and floral designer. Around this time, she had been in the hospital receiving treatment for mental health issues. Her daughter, Lisa Anselmo, said that despite her mother's mental struggles, she was still a very loving parent who always doted on her children. That is, until January 2, 1997, when Margaret left home to cash a check and strangely never returned. The next morning, on January 3rd, a delivery driver discovered her body face down in a snowy alley under a semi-truck trailer in the 700 block of East Pacific Avenue. She'd sadly been sexually assaulted and beaten to death. Robbery was ruled out, because she still had the money from her check in her purse. Unfortunately, with few leads to go on, the case would go unsolved for the next 28 years. Thankfully, investigators preserved the DNA that was collected from the sexual assault kit in hopes that advancements in forensic science might someday be able to use it to identify her killer. The case was revisited multiple times over the years, but real progress didn't come until 2022, when Spokane Police Sergeant Zach Stormont decided to take a fresh look. A DNA profile had already been developed years earlier and entered into CODIS, but no matches were found. The evidence was then sent to Othram, and a more complete DNA profile was generated. After volunteer genealogist Linda Keenan worked out the suspect's family tree, investigators were able to identify the suspect as Brian J. Anderson. Unfortunately, justice could never be served because Anderson took his own life in 2009 at the age of 33. Regardless, further testing proved that he was the one and only possible suspect. At the time of the murder, he was 20 years old and didn't live in the immediate area where Margaret's body was found. Regardless of the identification, investigators are still looking for anyone with additional information and are encouraged to contact Crime Check at 509-456-2233 and reference case number 972325. Rhonda Marie Fisher was born on October 12, 1956. By the age of 30, Rhonda was the mother to a young child living in Denver, Colorado. She'd been staying with acquaintances until her untimely death in the spring of 1987. On the night of March 31st, Rhonda was last seen walking north on South Monaco Parkway towards Leetsdale Drive. The following day, a passerby found Rhonda's body down an embankment along South Perry Park Road, just south of Sedalia in rural Douglas County. Investigators determined that she'd sadly been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. They also noted she had suffered severe injuries, including human bite marks on her breast, eyes removed by a knife, and the toes on her left foot had been bitten off. Unfortunately, with very few leads to go on, the case went unsolved for the next 40 years. In 2025, the Cold Case Unit at the Douglas County Sheriff's Office re-reviewed the case and decided to send the paper bags that had been placed over Rhonda's hands for DNA testing. They attempted this in 2017 with no luck, but finally, with new testing, they discovered that DNA from the killer had transferred to Rhonda's hands and then onto the bags. The DNA profile was then uploaded to CODIS and matched to Vincent Darrell Groves, one of Colorado's most prolific serial killers. Groves was active between 1978 and 1988 and was known for targeting vulnerable women, including a few prostitutes and some other women he personally knew. Groves was first convicted of second-degree murder in 1982 for killing 17-year-old Tammy Sue Woodrum. He was released in 1987 on mandatory parole after serving just 5 years. He later received a life sentence for the first-degree murder of Juanita Lovato, who went by Becky, and an additional 20 years for the second-degree murder of Diane Montoya Moncera. He was also convicted of murdering a woman in Douglas County in 1988, as well as another victim in a nearby county that same year. Unfortunately, he could never be held accountable for Rhonda's murder because he died in prison in 1996. Theresa Fusco was born on January 18, 1968, to Thomas Fusco and Connie Napoli, and grew up in Lynbrook, New York, alongside her brother Michael. By the time Theresa was 16, her parents had divorced, and she'd moved in with her mother and brother on Windsor Place in Lynbrook. She was also a junior at East Rockaway High School. On the evening of November 10, 1984, Theresa left her house around 5:30 or 6 p.m. to head to her part-time job at Hot Skates, a popular local roller rink located just a few minutes from her home. She worked at the snack bar and had made plans to visit her best friend Lisa after her shift that night. She was also preparing to see her dad in Queens the next day and had already started packing for the trip. At 9:47 p.m., Theresa left work, visibly upset after getting fired for an argument she had with the assistant manager. Sadly, after that, she was never seen alive again. That night, Theresa's mother, Connie, was hanging out with a friend from work, playing board games and talking. When Theresa didn't come home, she thought she might have stayed over at her friend Lisa's house, since Theresa had mentioned that possibility. She wasn't worried until the next morning, when she saw that Theresa's bed hadn't been slept in, and her suitcase was still packed. Connie then called Lisa and learned that Theresa had never arrived. Together, they started calling other friends, hoping someone had seen her. This was the beginning of every mother's worst nightmare. In the days and weeks after Theresa went missing, Connie received cruel prank calls from people pretending to have information. One caller even pretended to be Theresa, saying she was suffocating. A few months before Theresa disappeared, her friend Kelly Morrissey, who was 15, had also vanished. Kelly was last seen walking along the same street where Theresa worked. The two girls had been friends for a short time, but Theresa had distanced herself because she was uneasy about some of the people Kelly spent time with. Strangely, Theresa talked about why she stopped being friends with Kelly on the very day she herself went missing. Hot Skates was a favorite hangout for local teens, and Kelly often spent time there as well. Both girls lived in Lynbrook, were last seen around the same time of night, and disappeared within a mile of each other. Almost a month later, on December 5th, two local teenagers discovered Theresa's body in a wooded area just a few blocks from both Theresa's home and Hot Skates. She had sadly been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death. Even though investigators preserved key evidence that would eventually break the case wide open, the identity of the killer would remain a mystery for the next 4 decades. On the night Theresa disappeared, a man named John French had his tan Oldsmobile stolen from a spot less than a mile from Hot Skates. The car was taken sometime between 9:30 and 11:05 p.m. A week later, he found it abandoned near the railroad tracks in Lakeview, about 2 miles away. The windshield was broken, the license plates had been switched, and his sister found a pair of striped women's jeans under the passenger seat. Plus, the rope he kept in the back seat was missing. After hearing about Theresa's body being found, John reported all of this to the police, thinking the two cases might be connected. The car was processed and hair was found that, according to the lead detective's handwritten notes, was, and I quote, more than 50% similar to deceased and less than 100% similar. John was then shown a piece of rope and a brown felt pouch, which were presumably found at the crime scene, and he identified them as the missing items from his car. Unfortunately, neither the rope nor the jeans was tested for blood, and the items were eventually misplaced or destroyed. 2 years after Theresa's death, Dennis Halstead, John Restivo, and John Kogut were convicted of her murder. They served 17 years in prison before DNA exonerated them in 2003. The men then filed a civil lawsuit against Nassau County, the police, and others involved in the investigation. In 2014, after a long legal battle, Halstead and Restivo received a combined $18 million settlement, and Kogut received $30 million. Kogut won more in the settlement because he chose not to settle out of court and instead proved to a jury that the police had fabricated evidence against him and forced a false confession out of him. In August 2023, Nassau County investigators sent a vaginal swab from Theresa's case for advanced DNA testing at a lab in Houston. The lab built a DNA profile, which enabled the FBI and local investigators to identify a possible suspect as Richard Bilodeau, who was now living a quiet life on Long Island and working night shifts at a local Walmart. In early 2024, investigators began surveilling Bilodeau and were eventually able to collect DNA from a smoothie cup straw he threw away. Those DNA results confirmed the investigators' suspicions. Bilodeau was indeed their suspect. In October of 2025, now 63, Bilodeau was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in Theresa's case. At the time of the murder, he was a 23-year-old living with his grandparents about a mile from where Theresa lived and worked. He told police that he ran a mobile coffee truck in the area at the time. He has no known criminal record, and according to Theresa's family and friends, there was no known connection between the two before her death. Sadly, Theresa's mother passed away in 2019, but thankfully her father Thomas is still alive and was able to attend the news conference with prosecutors. At this time, Bilodeau has pleaded not guilty, is awaiting trial, and is innocent until proven guilty. If he is convicted, he faces up to 25 years to life in prison. Tishawn Folks Taylor was born in the Bronx in May of 1979. After graduating from Monsignor Scanlon High School in 1997, she moved to Schenectady, New York, and got a job as a caseworker. She then unfortunately met Timothy Taylor, who would end up being physically abusive toward her. Regardless, they married and had 2 children together, but that didn't stop the abuse. During some of the altercations, Taylor had shaved Tishawn's head, burned her with an iron, and even choked her. After 10 years of abuse, they finally divorced. By the age of 44, Tishawn was a single mother of 3, living in an apartment in Schenectady. While the abuse remained with her, she told coworkers she finally felt safe from Taylor because he had a new woman in his life and she still had a protection order against him. Sadly, she couldn't have been more wrong. On May 13, 2023, at around 8 a.m., Timothy Taylor's pregnant girlfriend, Theresa Gregg, who worked as a police officer for the Department of Homeless Services, was found dead by her 14-year-old twin daughters inside the Williamsburg apartment she shared with Taylor. She'd been stabbed by Taylor multiple times with a screwdriver after an argument. Unfortunately, when officers arrived, Taylor had already fled the scene and was now hiding out in North Carolina. 2 weeks later, he left North Carolina, drove to Schenectady, and checked into a hotel. Then, in the early morning hours of May 28, 2023, he entered Tishawn's apartment and stabbed her to death, while 2 of his own children were inside. He then escaped through a window, discarded bloody clothing while walking down the street, took a taxi back to his hotel, and later headed to the bus station. Using his phone, investigators were able to track him down to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he was arrested and extradited back to New York. During questioning, Taylor shocked investigators by saying he regretted killing Theresa, but was not sorry about Tishawn, who he said deserved it. On July 1, 2025, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for the death of Tishawn and was sentenced to 22 years to life in prison. At this time, he's still facing a pending indictment for the murder of Theresa Gregg.